This is the Tokina 11-16mm F2.8, a lens that wasn't designed for Micro Four Thirds in mind, but in this video, we're going to go over what makes it so great for the format regardless. If you're new here, I'm Jake McHugh, and this channel is all about making better videos. I do gear reviews and test videos to help you determine what gear you need to make the videos you want to achieve. If that's something that may interest you, consider hitting that subscribe button down below. For starters, this lens is actually an APS-C lens for Canon and Nikon DSLRs like the 90D or D5300, for example. But lucky enough for us mirrorless and Micro Four Third users, we can easily adapt this lens using electronical adapters or a speed booster. With a speed booster or focal reducer, you get an 8 to 11mm f2 because of the reduced crop factor. If you're not sure what a speed booster does, it's basically like a reverse teleconverter. It reduces the crop factor of sensors smaller than full frame while gaining some extra light. This is why they're other known as focal reducers. For example, with the Micro Four Thirds sensor and the GH5, the speed booster would behave as if it were an APS-C camera to begin with. If you want to know more about speed boosters and an affordable option to one, I'll have a video I did linked in the cards and in the description. But back to this lens setup, getting wide shots can be tough with Micro Four Thirds cameras because of that 2x crop factor. But with this lens and speed booster combo, you are able to achieve that while having a faster aperture for light. With the focal length of 8 to 11mm with the speed booster makes this lens great for any type of gimbal work like real estate or for vlogging, along with astrophotography and landscape for photo users. What makes this great for gimbals is that it has internal zooming, which is perfect as you won't have to rebalance the gimbal at all when you're changing focal lengths. One thing to note with using this combo with a camera that has IBIS like the GH5, you will want to turn off stabilization in camera, as this will fight the wide angle and give you some weird warping in the edges, but I don't have any issues with leaving operation mode on. This lens is super sharp, and even with the speed booster, you don't have to worry about any degrade in image quality at all. This lens is much bigger than your traditional Micro Four Thirds lens, coming in at 89mm or 3.5 inches in length and 560 grams or 1.2 pounds in weight. Even with this bigger size, I find that it pairs really nicely with the GH5, and I've actually come to prefer the added weight and size as it helps with pulling focus and stability. Autofocus for video isn't that good because this lens is noisy, but Panasonic cameras struggle with autofocus to begin with using native lenses, so you're really not missing out on much. Push button autofocus in manual mode does work a lot better, but I wouldn't use this in audio sensitive situations because, as I mentioned, it is noisy, which you can listen to here. Manual focus is much better on this lens compared to Micro Four Thirds options because it is linear and not fly-by-wire, giving you more consistency when rack focusing. It also has hard stops, which is really handy when pulling focus manually so you know when you have hit your limits. Autofocus for photos is much better than it is for video, but it will start struggling more once you get in low light. On this lens, there is no AF on switch. It's weirdly controlled by the focus ring. This in a way could be a positive by locking your focus for you in manual focus mode, so once you have your focus set, you could pop it into autofocus on the lens, and then that way if you were to bump the focus ring at all, your focus wouldn't move. On the other hand, this could be a negative because when pulling focus, you could slip into autofocus on accident, and then you would be moving the ring without knowing that you aren't going to focus on your subject. When you are in manual mode on the camera and have the lens set to autofocus, this is where you can either use push button or tap to focus using the touchscreen to set focus using a single shot AF to lock on a subject, and this is really handy when in running gun situations. This lens isn't weather sealed, but it does have filter threads at 77mm, which again shows the size of this lens, but there are Micro Four Thirds options out there that don't even have weather sealing or filter threads at all. Another bonus with this lens is that you're able to grow with it as a filmmaker since it's very adaptable if you get the Canon EF mount like I have. You very easily can adapt it to Micro Four Thirds cameras like the GH5 or the Pocket 4K, but yet you still can use it on APS-C size sensors that are found in some cinema cameras like the Reds, the C200, or the Pocket 6K. When comparing this lens to native options for wide zooms, there's about 3 lenses that come to mind, 2 by Panasonic. The 7 to 14mm f4 at $800 new with no filter threads, and slow at f4 for interior or low light scenes. The other one is the 8 to 18mm f2.8 to f4 at $1,000 new, which does have filter threads, but it doesn't have the constant aperture that you would prefer for video use. Lastly, there is the Olympus 7 to 14mm f2.8 Pro lens, which is $1,200 brand new, and it does have the constant aperture and weather sealing, but no filter threads. I feel like with all the shortcomings of the other lenses that this makes the Tokina a better investment with having a constant aperture of f2 with the speed booster, having filter threads, linear focus, and being able to adapt to other camera systems. Lastly, and probably the most important advantage to this lens is its price. Now, there is a newer model to this lens which you can get for around $400 to $450, but if you want to save a few bucks, you could get the version I have, which is the ATX Pro DX2, as the new one still makes the autofocus noise that this one does. If you want to save even more money, you could go with the Nikon mount with a Nikon to Micro Four Thirds speed booster from Viltrox, but I do feel like the Canon is the better option because you can adjust the aperture from the camera and still use autofocus for photos. If all the different models I just mentioned confused you at all, I will have links to everything I mentioned down in the description below so it's easier to find what works best for you. So for anywhere from $400 to $600, you can get this exact setup with the Viltrox speed booster, which I think is a much better investment than what any of the native Micro Four Thirds options offer. Make sure to let me know in the comments all the wide angle lenses that you have tried and which one is your favorite. So that's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, make sure you hit that thumbs up button down below and subscribe if you want to see more content like this in the future, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace.